How the first people came to Oregon. Questions to think about while we're reading. What is an archaeologist? Where do archaeologists think the first people in America came from? How long do scientists think there have been people living in America? List 3 ways archaeologists find out about the past. What are the 6 tribal regions in Oregon? These are questions that you will have to answer in a quiz on Google Classroom after reading this text. Long ago, people told stories that explained many things about nature. They did not write these stories down. Old people told them to young people. Mothers and fathers told them to children. In this way, the stories were passed on. Today, we explain nature in a different way. Science gives us reasons for things being the way they are. Many of the old stories are still with us. We call them myths. In this lesson, we will read a myth. It tells how Indian people came to Oregon. Next, we will read the modern story of how people came to Oregon. So I know that we're going to be reading about how people used to think they came to exist where they are now. And then I know I'm going to hear what science says brought people to Oregon. The first people of Oregon had many stories to explain where they came from. The stories of Coyote and Fire is one of them. Like many Indian stories, it tells of the adventures of animals. Coyote is the hero of many of these stories. Okay, subheading, Indian Fire, as told by Rick Steber. I will tell you how the Indians came to have fire. It happened long ago when the earth was still being made and fire was only to be found at the top of a mountain where the Skookum, the ghost people, guarded it. So I know that Skookum are also called the ghost people. They would not share the power of fire. The Indians lived in the lowlands and they were very cold. They would die if they did not have fire. Coyote saw this and he went to the Indians and said, I will steal fire from the Skookum and give it to you. They will chase me. All the creatures of the woods must help me. Coyote climbed the mountain, crept quietly forward, and hid a pile of brush where he could watch the fire and the Skookum who guarded it. He waited until the guards were changing places, and when their backs were turned to him, he dashed in, picked up fire, and went racing down the mountain. The Skookum chased him and caught hold of the tip of his tail. To this day, the tip of the Coyote's tail is colored white from the touch of the Skookum. Coyote tossed fire to Squirrel. Squirrel jumped from branch to branch, tree to tree. The fire was very hot and made Squirrel's tail curve over his back. But still he managed to pass fire to Frog. Frog took the fire in his mouth and hopped away. Skookum was much faster than Frog and grabbed him by the tail. Frog gave a mighty leap and broke off his tail. That is why frogs have no tails. Again, the Skookum raced after Frog and almost grabbed him when Frog spit out the fire onto wood. Wood swallowed fire. The Skookum grabbed up wood and tried in every way to make wood give up fire. They ranted and raved long into the night, but wood refused to give up fire. Finally, the Skookum returned to their cold mountain. Coyote called the Indians together. He told them, I know how to get fire out of wood. He took 2 pieces of dry wood and rubbed them together. Fire leaped out of wood. Okay, so I know that Indian Fire, the story I just read aloud, I'm thinking aloud right now about how this is a myth, and this is a myth explaining where fire comes from. It also explains that the coyote's tip of his tail turned white because of this story, that the squirrel's tail is curved, and that frogs don't have a tail. So this is a myth that explains quite a few things in nature. Okay, so that's the idea of myths, like the intro said. Now I know the title says the work of archaeologists. So now the text is going to tell me what science says about origins and where people come from here. Okay, so how do we know what happened? Oh, I'm sorry. How do we know what happened long ago? Sometimes we have written records. People who were there wrote down what they saw. They kept their notes in diaries or journals, or they wrote books. We can read these books or diaries to find out about the past. Because Indians of Oregon and many other people of ancient times kept no written records, we cannot read what happened in Oregon before the explorers came about 200 years ago. But we can find out some of what happened with the help of scientists called archaeologists. Archaeologists are people who study the past. They also try to explain how the first people came to Oregon. Many archaeologists believe the first people in America came from Asia. The first people were probably traveling hunters. They came across at the place where Asia and Alaska are very close. Look at the map on this page. You can see how close they are. So Asia and Alaska. Holy moly, they are super close. Look at that. Look, there's Oregon, Washington. This would be Canada now, which is connected to Alaska. And then Alaska is super close to Asia. You can see how close they are. These people came to America thousands of years ago. They spread to different parts of the continent. They were the ancestors of people we call Indians. There have been Indians living in Oregon for over 10,000 years. In a cave near Fort Rock, sandals were found that are more than 9,000 years old. They are made from sagebrush bark. Archaeologists study things left from the past, and they study the places where those things are found. By studying these articles, they can tell much about the people who left them. For example, what if they find a stone spear point buried in a cave? They could tell that people who once lived in that cave made stone tools and hunted animals. Archaeologists also have ways of knowing how old things are. One way is to look at the location where they were found. So they look at the location they found the item. If something is deep down, it is probably older than things found closer to the surface of the ground. Another way to find how old something might be is with carbon-14 dating. This scientific test tells how much of a certain substance is in things that were once alive. All living things have carbon-14 in them. When they die, carbon-14 starts to go out of them. Scientists know how fast carbon-14 disappears. They can tell how old something is by how much carbon-14 is left in it. Archaeologists put together what they know about things they find and how old things are. By doing this, they can tell much about how the people in a certain place lived when they lived there. By doing this, they can tell much about how the people in a certain place lived when they lived there. By studying written notes from the past and by studying written notes from the past and findings of archaeologists, we can learn a lot about people who first lived in Oregon. Okay, so I'm going to use the comprehension strategy of summarizing. So when you summarize, that's a comprehension strategy. And so I'm going to summarize what I read just now. I'm going to model summarizing as a comprehension strategy. Before I do that, I want to point out that here are the 6 tribal regions of Oregon. There is the Plateau, the Lower Columbia, the Coast, Inland Valleys, Klamath Lakes, and Great Basin. So, some things I read is that Native Americans have stories, we call them myths, to explain where things come from and things they see in nature. There's also scientists called archaeologists, and what their job is, they are people who study the past. They believe the first people in America came from Asia. So they believe that the people in the Oregon, those first Native Americans, those Indians, they came from Asia originally. That they have been here for over 10,000 years. I learned that archaeologists, they find out about the past by studying places where they find items and by dating those using carbon-14 dating. And they also just plain study things that they find, and they study where they find them. I also saw that Asia and Alaska are really close. And so this is a possible route that Native Americans could have taken from Asia through Alaska and down the coast and ended up in Oregon. Very cool.